And here we go. Good morning, folks, and welcome to Mark's Business Check-In. I do this every weekday morning at 7:30 a.m. for about 20 minutes, talking about all the things that have gone right for me in business over the last 30 years and all the things that have gone wrong for me that you may be able to use to make sure it does the same things don't happen to you. So over the last few days, we've been talking about what happens when you buy a company. And we had part one and part two. What happens when you buy a company? You've paid the money, the things to do and things not to do on your first day, and then for your next 20 or 30 or 40 days. But one of the things that some people have asked me is, how do you buy a company? What is the initial steps you take to get someone interested in to sell a company to you, right? And this varies. I think how on two different occasions how I've done it. The first one was when I was buying the advertising agency. I knew the owner of the company, and I knew at his age he was maybe interested in selling the business, and I was looking to buy a business. It didn't really bother to me what type of business I bought, as long as it was something I could get my teeth into and something I enjoyed. So I was going from an internet company to an advertising agency. So I wasn't buying to scale up. I wasn't buying to add on to my present business. I was buying as a standalone business that I could get involved in. So like a lot of things, the initial conversation usually happens over the cup of coffee. It may be an Irish thing, it may be a UK thing, but the initial conversation usually happens over a cup of coffee, where you break the ice and you bring it into the conversation that you're interested in maybe buying the business and would they be interested in selling. When I had that initial conversation with the owner that I bought the company of, he didn't really want to sell. He was a reluctant seller because he loved his business, but he knew because of his age that if anything happened to him, the value of the business would disappear, because to everybody in the industry, he was the business. And I had to be very careful of that. I'm very careful how I manage that process of even him leaving the business. But he was the business. So managing that whole process was going to be tricky in itself. But when I put the idea out to him the first time, I offered ridiculously low money. Like, I think I initially said to him, I started off for £100,000. And then on a second cup of coffee, I said, look, why don't we go, I'll offer you £1 million for the business. Now, the trick is, or the strategy is, when you offer somebody money for business and they come back and say, that figure's way too low, you now know you have them interested in buying the business. And if you get them interested in actually spending the money in their head, then you have the business locked in. So he came back to me and said, £1 million is too low. So once he made that statement to me, I knew, and because I'm dyslexic, I knew strategic-wise and people-wise, I could see the whole full picture of where this was going to go. So I knew once I got him knowing that the £1 million is too low, he was now thinking about it. I now planted a seed in his head to sell to me. And once you get somebody ready to sell, that's half the battle. So I met him for a cup of coffee, and then we met for lunch in a hotel, the Radisson Hotel in Dublin, and we had a lovely lunch, a lovely day, and we spent about 3 hours over lunch talking about, if I bought the business, what would I be doing with the business? Because this was his business for about 40 years. So he wanted to make sure, what was my objective? Was I going to change things? Was I going to bring in new people? Was I going to get rid of the people that were there? And that's very important also when you're buying the business of someone. You have to remember, if it's an entrepreneur that has grown the business from scratch, and whether they've had it for 5 years or 10 years or 30 years or 40 years, they have a strong attachment to that business. And because they have a strong attachment to that business, you need to be very careful how you entice them to sell it to you. And even though they're getting a lot of money for the business, they still see it as their baby. And a lot of people find it very hard to give up the business and are worried about what will happen when they move away, what will happen to their staff, what will happen to their business, what will happen to their customers and suppliers, many who they will probably know extremely well, right? So you're managing that process. So over about 2 or 3 hour dinner, I told them what my idea was for the business. It wasn't radical because the business was operating very well. And there was movement to bring in a new way of selling, in the sense that a lot of people selling in that company. There's an awful lot of customers there who've been there a long time, which is fantastic. Steady income, steady customers. But they weren't really getting out there and reaching for new customers. They weren't tendering for bigger contracts. They were keeping themselves fairly safe, in my mind. And that's what I believed. But I couldn't say that to him, that I thought he was just playing it safe, because that would be a no-no in his book and probably would have crashed the deal right away. So I told him that I think there's room to grow the business and to let someone a bit younger come in and bring in the experience of growing other businesses. And it took about 3 to 4 months for us to finally agree to a one-pager of what I was buying. And we agreed on £5 million. And we agreed on that he would keep the building and we would lease the building off him. We agreed on the staff, all the staff will stay. We agreed on his role over the next year within the business. We agreed on a lot of stuff. But even that one pager, there was only about 8 or 9 items in that one pager, the deal sheet. Even with that, a few times when we put that sheet together, the deal nearly fell apart because he was still very much a reluctant seller. He could see the money coming in. Now, he couldn't understand how I was raising it, right? Because he kept saying, well, you don't have the money. How are you getting the money? And I think really, if he knew how we were going to raise it from day one and he had been a bit younger, he probably would have raised it himself and got his own management staff to buy him out. If someone did try to buy him out about 2 or 3 years earlier, but that person sadly died in the middle of the process. So the deal fell apart. So this was his second shot at selling the business. This was his second shot at selling the business to someone else. So even putting together that deal for the 10 items, about the building, about his role, and even about even all the stuff around his role, it took me a while to convince him that we still want him involved in the business for 1 or 2 or 3 years even. Now, ideally, sometimes you don't want the previous owner heavily involved in the business because you want to make your changes, you want to put your own stamp on it, you want to do your own type of stuff, right? So ideally, you don't want to do that, right? But I could tell he was worried that he was going to be stuck at home all day after years working, after years in the business. So I had to find a role for him within the company. And he was still going to be involved in managing all the customers that he'd managed for the last 10, 20, 30 years. He was still going to be involved in managing those companies to a certain point. But I also knew something very, very important. I remember my father telling me this, that he remembers someone on the car ferries many years ago, who retired. And they kept coming down to the car ferry every morning for breakfast and talk to all the staff. Because they wanted to still have the feeling of being involved, being in the business. But then one morning, he heard someone say about him, "Why is he always here? I thought he was retired." He heard that comment be made, and that man was never seen again. He knew he wasn't wanted. And that happened to the chap we took over from about a year and a half into the business, or a year into the business. Someone made a comment behind his back that he heard saying, "Why is he still hanging around?" And he rang me one morning to say he wouldn't be coming in anymore. He felt he wasn't needed. He felt his time was up. But he heard that comment being made by someone within the company. So that's how you have to be careful in managing someone who's managed the business or ran the business for a number of years. So When you get someone interested so we made the offer, we did a due diligence in the business, we valued the business at a certain figure, and we offered below that. Excuse me, we offered about £4 million. And then their accountants came back and said they didn't think £4 million was the right figure compared to what other businesses within that sector were selling for and the valuations. So we finally agreed on a figure of 5 million. And now when you agree on the figure, the next step is, how are we going to pay it? We knew we were going to pay so much up front and so much over 3 years. That was the deal. Some businesses will go in and they'll pay, some people when they're taking over a business will pay for the whole business in one go and they own the business outright. We did own the business outright, but we have there were certain stipulations in the contract that if we failed to miss any payments of the balance of the money, that the shares, a certain portion of the shares, would revert back to them. But that never happened. So some people will pay for the whole lot up front, others won't. Now, even the way we wanted to structure the deal nearly fell apart because they really wanted the money all up front. But we weren't going to pay it up front. First of all, we couldn't afford to pay it up front, and that was the underlying factor. And even if we could afford, we wouldn't have paid all that money up front because we wanted him to be involved in the business. We wanted one of the directors, owners, to be still involved in the business for a period of time because they had a good few government contracts and stuff like that. And the relationship was there between him and the different government departments. So we had to manage that carefully. So, but I know people who've done a lot of deals and they've got all the money up front. I know one person in particular for 2 deals, they got all the money up front, and they said they were going to stay for a year. And after 6 weeks, they decided to go because they realized they weren't the boss anymore. It wasn't their company. Someone else was running it, and they were really only now a glorified consultant stroke employee, and that wasn't their game. So that's why you need to be careful on how you structure the deal. But even after getting him interested in the deal, I knew already him and one or two of the other owners were already spending the money in their head. They were figuring out maybe moving to a new house, buying new cars or whatever to do, or going on fantastic holidays. I knew the closer we got to the day, the closing the deal, that they were spending the money and they were fully committed. And it was getting very hard for them to pull out. And it was going to be very painful for both of us to pull out. And this is the crucial thing. You need to get to a point where it's too painful for either side to pull out. That both sides do not want to pull out because the pain factor in losing a deal that you invested so much time and money in is too much. They had invested money in accountants and solicitors. They had invested money also mentally, and they invested an awful lot of emotions in going ahead and agreeing to sell the business to me. So there's an awful lot of emotions invested there. I had invested a lot of money up to the day we closed the deal. Our bill was 160,000 for solicitors and accountants, right? So our bill was high as well. So I had to have the deal go through. Otherwise, there would be a massive bill to pay and nothing to show for it. But also emotionally, I had already decided I was leaving the company I was in. I was getting less and less involved in it. And I knew emotionally that if this deal didn't go through, I didn't want to stay in the company I was presently working in. It wasn't for me any longer, right? It wasn't for me any longer. So managing that deal, but it all started, and this is the thing, all started with a cup of coffee. The whole thing started with a cup of coffee. And as I said, a lot of things in life, it starts with a cup of coffee or a cup of tea where you ask someone that big question. Are you interested in selling your business to me? And how you say it, how you ask them that question is up to you. But if you ask people that question, you'd be surprised the answer you get back. When I offered the chap I bought the company of £100,000, I knew I was never going to get the business for £100,000. I knew I wasn't going to get it for £1 million, but I knew I was going to get the business. The trick is I had to manage the process from a reluctant seller all the way along very carefully. I couldn't, even though I'm being dyslexic, you always want to jump ahead. You always want to push things along. You always want things to happen now. But I had to pull myself back to make sure those things didn't happen now, because the person selling to me wanted things to go slow. They would have been happy if the deal didn't go ahead for 2 years. Right? They just were slow. Even on the morning we signed and did the deal in the solicitor's office, my solicitor was still finalising some of the paperwork. And even at that 11th hour, they were threatening to walk away if my solicitor did not come down out of his office within 15 minutes. That's how reluctant they were to sell the company. Yet they wanted the £5 million. Yet they knew that if they dropped dead, the value of the business would fall to the floor. And I probably would have got it for 100,000 or £1 million if he had died during the sales process. But he wanted to leave a legacy with his family. He wanted to leave money, so he needed to sell. But even at that 11th hour, he was willing to walk away from the whole deal, because he was very unhappy when he signed the deal and took that check. Always reminds me of Richard Branson when he sold Virgin Records because he had to sell it, because he owed a lot of money to the banks. And he says in his book, I'm a Virgin, they're walking in the mall in London to receive a check for 500 million. He was so unhappy because he didn't want to sell his business. He didn't want to let go of his business. But he did. And the person I bought the company of was exactly the same. He didn't want to sell the company. Even when we gave him the initial check for 3 million, he was still unhappy. He was still unhappy with that check for 3 million because now his company was gone. Now, he came in every morning for the next 6 or 7 months until he heard that comment be made, but why is he still hanging around? He came in every morning. He still kept a relationship with the customers. He made sure they stayed with us. He did everything he was asked to do, which was fantastic. The big challenge for me was getting his mindset away from that he was no longer the managing director and owner of the business that I was. That was a big mindset in changing that. But that's for another podcast, another morning. Anyway, folks, thanks very much for joining me this morning. We really appreciate it. If you missed any of our shows, we've been doing this since the 6th of January. If you've missed any of the shows, they're all on YouTube at Mind's Eye Education. So they're all on YouTube at Mind's Eye Education. We've about 30 shows up there now. We've an awful lot of free training videos. We've some great interviews my latest interview is with Tara Fay, who is an international wedding coordinator and event organizer. So if you're getting married soon and you need someone to manage your whole wedding, or you want to know the whole process, listen to the podcast that's on our YouTube channel with Tara Fay. She's been doing this for 20 years. Fantastic business, fantastic person. So definitely listen to that. I have other interviews up there with other well-known entrepreneurs and business owners that may give you some inspiration, may give you some ideas, may help you decide whether you want to go into business for yourself or you don't. But they're all up there on our YouTube channel at Mind's Eye Education. And we've an awful lot of stuff up there about dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, autism. We've a lot of stuff up there as well. If you're struggling, if you need help in your company, at home, with your loved ones, with your children, around dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, there's a lot of stuff up there as well for you. Or you can just reach out to us and go to our company, mindseyeeducation.com. mindseyeeducation.com. Thanks for joining me this morning, folks. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody on all our channels. We usually stay live for a few more minutes on TikTok. So everybody else, have a great morning and have a great day.